Welcome to Access for All. I'm Rita Satz, and I'm here with Dr. Bernard Starr, psychologist and gerontologist. He's just written an article with the very intriguing solutions to only what are probably the most important subjects of the day and things that we worry about: education and the economy. Dr. Starr is an educator. He was a professor at CUNY and at Marymount Manhattan College. He's a writer. He's written 2 books and several columns. And keeping up with the times, he now writes a blog for the prestigious Huffington Post. His most recent one is really intriguing because it deals with these serious problems and solutions. The last time I talked to you, Bernie, we talked about your last article, which had really an ominous title. It was "Old Age is Killing Us, but it doesn't have to."
Longevity is killing us.
Longevity is killing us, but it doesn't have to, which sounded a little scary. And it presented a lot of the problems of an aging population, and at the end we did have some solutions. But now you've gone further than that with some really very intriguing solutions. And I'm going to read this title because I really like it: How Seniors Can Save the American Education and the Economy. So I think I'd like you to start, if you will, by going over briefly the problems as you're seeing them of this aging economy, and then I'd really like to get to some of these solutions that you've got.
The problem or the issue is a very simple one, actually, that we're an aging society, that the older population is growing in leaps and bounds, and that has to do with what's called the longevity revolution, that over the last 100 years we've added 50% to life expectancy. And as a result of that, what we're seeing is a gap between a growing elderly population and comparatively a shrinking younger population. And one of the major issues that brings up is, well, how are we going to pay for an aging society with a shrinking population?
Well, you even went beyond that, because one of the phrases that stuck in my mind was that the older population are becoming the takers, not makers.
Well, that's the way they're perceived, and a lot of commentators have said that the aging of society, giving us this huge population of older people, which is about to, in the new census, become the largest single group in society, greater than infants, young children, adolescents, young adults, middle-aged adults. And the question is, well, how are we going to support this group? There's all kinds of entitlements for these groups, and Social Security and other benefits are paid for by dedicated taxes, but those taxes will shrink as the working population comparatively shrinks. You know, when Social Security was first introduced, there were over 40 workers per retiree, and now we're down to about 3, and it's going to less than 2. We discussed that last time. So how are we going to pay? And that's why a lot of commentators are saying, oh, older people, they're takers, they have greater needs, they drain our resources, our medical resources, and their demands are disproportionately greater than other segments of the population.
You talk about that, but you also talk about what you're trying to address, I think, is the productivity or the lack of productivity.
Yes, I mean that's my basic thesis. That first, that we have a very narrow view of this longevity revolution, that we have more older people, and how are we going to pay for Social Security, how are we going to pay for Medicare. But I'm saying that this has, you know, much greater implications comparable to other great revolutions of history that changed everything.
But now, the other part of, you talked about 2 things. The other was education. You're talking about the economy and the effect of longevity on that. Now
where does
also
education
an effect
come
on
in?
education.
How does education fit into this? Well, there's a very obvious answer to that, and that is, as you have a shrinking younger population that has to support a growing elderly population, you're going to need a productive workforce, and you're going to need every able-bodied worker in that force. And not only that, that workforce is going to have to be educated to meet the demands of the 21st century. We're living in a technological world. It requires education. Yet our education system in this country, it's falling apart.
Well, now where are you putting these two together now?
Well, because we're going to need educated people to...
No. I mean, where are you putting this growing, aging population together with the problem of an uneducated population and trying to come up with a solution?
Oh, yes, okay, but that we're jumping ahead now to the solution
well, I'll let
part,
you get...
which essentially is that given that our education system is falling apart, how can we correct it? I mean, budget cuts at every level of education, the loss of programs, slashing programs, particularly the arts and music programs are going. And we have a high school dropout rate, about 25% at the college level. I think the figure is 30% of students drop out in the first year, and overall, about 40 to 50% don't graduate. Now that is going to hurt us in the future in terms of producing a productive workforce.
Well, is this kind of a self-fulfilling thing, because the less education people have and the less their parents are able to pay for it, the less young people are able to get a higher education?
Yeah, well, that's part of the problem. Why are people dropping out? Why have we dropped? At one time, the United States was the leader in the percentage of college graduates in our population that we produce. We've fallen to number 12 now in the industrialized world in terms of percent of college graduates. And commentators say that this is going to sink further. Now, one of the chief reasons for that is the cost. I mean, everybody and anybody who's sending children to college is aware of that. The costs are astronomical. They can be as high as 30, 40.
I can't even contemplate sending 3 children to college.
Well, that's an interesting comment, and I'm sure that people are suffering because of that, particularly in the current recession.
And the debts that these children are carrying now.
Well, they're carrying a huge debt. In fact, the figure is so mind-boggling that I didn't trust it when I first read it. So I pursued it. In fact, I tracked down the person who came up with it, Mark Kantrowitz. Now get this, the current outstanding student loan debt in the United States is over $860 billion. Billion dollars. At first I said, no, that can't be. And not only, I mean, it sounds like it's unbelievable. And the amount of debt that's added to that each year, that's initiated each year, is $100 billion in federal loans and $10 billion in private loans. And there too, I said, that sounds impossible. So I contacted Mark Kantrowitz, who's the person who developed the student loan debt clock. Folks, you could check it out for yourself, Google it, the student loan debt clock that's ticking away and is adding over $2,800 per second to student debt. Now, how are these students going to pay that off later? It's certainly going to cripple them in many ways.
Well, the debt isn't going to get less because colleges aren't going to be able to charge less. I mean, it's costing them more to educate.
Yeah, but how are they going to live in the future, pay all of their expenses and pay off this debt? It will take money away from the economy. We're a spending-starved economy. And then families, to meet these incredible costs of higher education, are dipping into their 401ks. And we can project that down the line that's going to certainly impact their retirement and their quality of life later on. And it's going to affect our competitive standing in the world in comparison to other nations.
Well, now that we're all thoroughly depressed, we've got an aging population on the one hand that is not as productive as it could be or has been. and is being perceived by the younger people really as the takers because of all the entitlements, we call them, or all the needs that they have. On the other hand, we have an economy that's going to shrink because we have young people who are not educated to produce, and production is what we need, I take it. Now, I know you're putting these together, so you're going to have to tell me how.
Well, I mean, you're familiar with my proposal, which is for free college education. Okay, now that, folks, sounds kind of too good to be true, and I'm sure it also is kind of eyebrow raising. But let me remind you of something, that we did have free college education in this country by and large, in many instances, and particularly here in New York City. In fact, I personally was a beneficiary of that. I went to Brooklyn College, which is part of now the City University.
City College, I remember.
And City College. My tuition, I believe, was $5 a semester.
Wow.
Okay, but what this reminds me of also is I once read an interview with Jonas Salk. Okay, now Jonas Salk went to City College that you just mentioned. They had no tuition at the time, and he commented, he said that his family was so poor that had there been any tuition whatsoever, he wouldn't have been able to go to college, and that sometimes he had to come to school with half a sandwich because that's all they could afford. And Jonas Salk gave us the polio vaccine, saved millions of lives.
That was then when somehow we were able to finance public education, higher education.
Yeah, but why is it then?
Why?
Let me remind you.
That's what I'm asking you.
Let me remind you of another fact, which is quite interesting, because people will say, well, you can't have that today, the economy, the cost, da. We had free college education during the Great Depression. Okay. And how is it that many European countries today still offer relatively free college education? In France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, some of them have fairly nominal
Well, how did
fees.
we do it, and how do they do it?
Well, I wonder. Obviously, it's doable.
But you've got another solution.
It's part of the commitment. Okay, so how could we offer free college education? And the program that I'm suggesting, which I'm calling TAFWU, T-A-F-W-U, Third Age Free Wisdom University.
Third age free wisdom
Third age
University.
meaning older people, the third age of life. That's a term that has emerged recently to refer to older adults. A lot of people warm up to that term. They like it better than seniors.
I like old myself, but that's all right.
Okay, well, good for you. But at any rate, the proposal is for retired college professors to teach the courses at this free university, and to do it via the technology that exists today, like Skype, interactive technologies. Okay.
Do you want to explain Skype? I'm not sure everybody knows
Skype,
what that is.
If we were communicating on Skype, we can see and hear each other.
Right.
Okay. There are courses today that are given by universities and online universities that offer courses. So it's perfectly doable.
Do you think that's where education is going anyhow?
Well, a lot of experts are saying that in the near future, that most of education will be delivered through interactive technologies like Skype. The fact is that many universities are currently using it, even for resident students, because some have come to the conclusion that what's the point of having 200-300 students in a lecture hall with the professor reading his notes, essentially. So it's kind of medieval. I mean, that's what we did at a time when there were no books around, before the printing press, where the teacher had the only book, really, and was kind of reading it to the students. The students were basically scribes. So you have a lot of colleges now are having those lectures delivered over Skype, where students could watch them in their dorms or anywhere else. And then they meet in smaller groups, sometimes with teaching assistants, for the more personal kind of tutorials.
It's almost a little bit like the Oxford system, not the Skype part of it, but the part where you study on your own and then meet with your tutor.
Yeah, exactly, but the Skype kind of improves on that, because you can have the interaction with the professor who delivers the lecture via that technology, and then you could break out into smaller groups. So how would we do the smaller groups if if we're doing it via Skype. And by the way, when you do the teaching via this, the new technologies, the students could be anywhere and the teacher could be anywhere. There's no limitation, so you don't really need a campus. And again, there are online universities, and they're growing in leaps and bounds, offering degrees strictly in that manner. Okay, but I have some additional suggestions for it. You know, with this proposal for having volunteer retired professors. Okay. Now, you and I know that that can work. A lot of people listening to this may say, well, that sounds a little preposterous. You know, who's going to teach without pay? But you and I have been part of a program that we started at Marymount Manhattan College called the Center for Learning and Living, where we have volunteer professors teaching courses. Now, yes, this is for a 50-plus audience and a lifelong learning course.
We've gotten some very prestigious people who were, I think, who are teaching.
But the model could be applied to any kind of teaching learning situation. And yes, much to our surprise, we got some fantastic world-class teachers like Charles Carshon, who was the chairman of the theater department at Sarah Lawrence College, taught at Actors Studio. And
then taught a theater course at
he taught
drama.
Theater, he taught literature courses, and was very popular. He's a brilliant teacher. But we've had other world-class. Enos Schlesinger, yes, retired political science professor from the State University of New York. So retired professors are willing to do that, and I think they would be willing to do it for this, particularly if it would help save America in many ways, save American education, make college possible for those who are dropping out because of the incredible costs of college, and thereby contribute to helping us produce a productive workforce ready for the 21st century.
This works with the older, retired people who are really anxious for mental stimulation and also to fill their time. It fills a lot of need for them. But I have some doubts, and maybe you can allay them a little bit, about whether the academic world would accept this and accredit the students, and whether the students would accept it.
Well, those are two separate issues.
Whether young people would. I'm asking
they're both very big points. First, can you get accredited with this? Well, I think you can, because we're going to be using in this model senior, world-class teachers. And then there's the possibility of affiliating this with an existing university, and I think that might speed up the accreditation process. But would this be accepted? I mean, in talking about this and in writing about it, I've gotten a few angry responses from current faculty saying, oh, you're going to put us out of work.
Really? Yeah.
Or adjunct faculty saying the same thing, essentially. We're getting paid so little now, and now you're going to take our jobs away from you. Well, that's kind of an odd response. On the one hand, people are saying older people are, takers, not makers, and then you come up with an idea where they could be makers and make an incredible contribution to education and to the economy, and people say, oh, but that's giving too much. But another point here is that if this TAFWU, free college education, is primarily for those who are dropping out because they can't afford it, or others who are not even bothering to apply because they can't afford it, well then that's not taking away from anybody. Because they wouldn't be. This
is an untapped resource that simply wouldn't get the education any other way.
Well, exactly.
It's not competing with anything.
But how you actually define who can't and who can afford it, will be a difficult issue. However, that's somewhat down the line. Nevertheless, I just want to put out this idea because it potentially can solve some of our educational problems, turn us around from this crumbling education system, help provide a 21st century ready workforce, ready with the technological and educational requirements for 21st century workforce.
You'd have kind of a two-tiered system. You'd have to be structured so that this wasn't perceived as a lower class higher education.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the initial reactions. Well, this isn't real education, but as I pointed out, many of the colleges are moving in this direction, are actually using this technology. In fact, recently I was offered an opportunity to teach a course for resident students in a university out in the Midwest, and I would be doing it from my apartment.
That's
and by the way, in terms of retired college professors, as you suggested, it would be good for them because it keeps them active and involved. It's good for the students because they're getting teaching and learning from master teachers, and it doesn't really take away from the leisure time activity of these retired people. They could do it from their leisure homes in Sun City. You could do it from a yacht floating around in the Mediterranean. You could do it from the moon.
That's a charming idea. I guess you would have to have some academic body to set up standards and to set the patterns for them so that you had some control over the quality of the education.
Oh yeah, this would require an administration, but there too we could have volunteer administrative staff. Now, could it be totally free? I mean, that's a big question.
There has to be some funding from it. Where do you see that coming from?
Well, I think you can need some paid administrative staff. It couldn't be totally free. But I think facilities can be provided. We've talked about this before because one of the, what I call the linchpins of this proposal working is related to a broader proposal that would require all seniors to
you led right to where I was going.
To participate in some form of give back and volunteerism. And in our last discussion and a previous article that I wrote, I proposed that there's a flaw in the current system of volunteerism. A lot of people would like to volunteer. It's not as easy as you think. It's very elitist in many ways that appeals to people.
So you're talking about these volunteer centers that people would actually have to go to?
Yes, in the neighborhood, locally, so that when you retire, you walk into one of these centers and you could be counseled, trained, shepherded along into some kind of appropriate give back, and that would provide for older people, the third age world, to contribute to productivity.
I think that's a wonderful idea because I think there are lots of people who want to volunteer and really don't know how. And the resources for doing it now are very limited. If you go online and try to find an opportunity to volunteer, it's very difficult to be placed.
True.
It really
I mean, there are a load of organizations like Match.com, like where you can go online. You could see.
Well, you've given us lots of thought and lots of ideas, and I think this is what we need, is some fresh thinking and a fresh way of looking at things and the use of the new technology and everything else. It's an awkward time now because we're sort of balanced in between with our seniors and our young people and the economy, and you're trying to mesh them.
Yes, and it would certainly restore, we talk gratuitously and salute seniors, their great wisdom and knowledge and whatnot, but we really don't incorporate it into a vital role, and this is one way in which that could be done. And another contribution, there's a film out now, a documentary called Waiting for Superman, and it's about the work of Jeffrey Canada, an educator, and he reminds us and says that Superman isn't going to save American education, but I think that super seniors could very well do that. Well,
I hope you're right, and I think one of the things that you did mention also is that this is a place where corporate money might be involved, where they might be willing, where people who are looking to sponsor creative programs without having to spend a lot of money might be able to sponsor some of these volunteer centers or,
Yes, there are a number of corporations, by the way, that are already donating space for community activities. And I think if you could fire up the imagination and the enthusiasm of both seniors in terms of making a vital contribution to the future of America, and the corporations as well, I think there will be an eagerness here, an enthusiasm to participate in this program, because it's real, and it's something that could be vital to our national defense, because national defense is not just a military kind of defense.
It depends on the economy, right?
Yeah, well, it depends on the economy, but we've also been thinking almost strictly about defense as military defense, when in fact a crumbling education system can be a great threat to our national defense in the long run. And by the way, historians remind us that great civilizations, for the most part, never fell because they lost a battle, a military battle. They fell because of internal decay. A good example, by the way, is when Rome was sacked by the barbarians, they walked in there. There was no military left anymore because of the internal decay.
Well, I think you've given us a lot to think about. I can see more interesting things coming up on that blog, or whatever outlet you're using.
Some of the great institutions in this country, universities, have incredible endowment, and I think it would be useful if they applied some of that to reducing the cost of
and to some innovative programs.
Now, some are, in all fairness. I think Harvard and a number of universities are opening the chest and helping out students with tuition. But there are others that are not, and some of them have multi-billion-dollar endowments. And rather than feeding that into research and other areas that pretty much are for self-promotion, I would like this discussion to generate some discussion of what leading institutions should do with their endowments for helping students.
We really appreciate that, and I hope that everybody will want to come back and hear more. I can see more interesting things coming up on that blog, or whatever outlet you're using. I hope all of you will be able to join us in another 2 weeks for another edition of Access All, and that you've enjoyed this discussion with Dr. Starr as much as I have. Thank you.